Gotta verify that everything is working today, as we're probably going to be talking a little more than usual today. Alright then. We are ready to go now. And as mentioned in our tweet, this is a Win 10 Battle Lounge matches week on Street Fighter V, which means we expect to see a couple more people. But we do have a specific goal for today, as that's going to be why you see Omnirabbit in the lounge today. The focus is going to be something that we are all need to work on from different sides, and he's the player who needs to work on it from the main side. He's also the one of us most likely to win matches, so for the time being, it's probably all going to work out. We'll see what happens once others join. It is still 3 rounds first to 2, with Rune Siren as the main person you're searching for, and it is a character select off lounge. Overall, we'll be working on checking dashes and other reactions related to that, at least when Omnirabbit is playing. And he in turn will be working on his dash up, timing, and dash confirms. I guess there's no better way to explain what those are, other than the fact that he has to dash up and decide on the way in if to block or not. But we do get to start off with watching Santir face off with the President's Guild. Santir's been scheming for a while about how to face this character, as he did help heavily with the initial development of Guildbot, and therefore has a lot of game plans that he's not had time to practice necessarily, but definitely has clearly in mind. From this side you may see some play from both Kazuki Dynasty and myself, and that may change within the lounge, so there's the possibility that you will see some Chun-Li play today.
Round 2. Fight.
As there will definitely be practice relative to Omnirabbit's flow that I need to do as well. But this is all about Santir getting to work, getting to put his plans into action without ever having actually faced our Guildbot. We do have the intention of finally purchasing the Champion Edition. We've finished all of our research on the usefulness of people not having certain matchups to see how much of an effect it really has, how much of it is mostly player skill, and we've got a fairly good idea of how much real effect it's having, to the point where it's middle of the road. We definitely say bots help enough that you have to care about whether or not you have certain ones, but not all of them. That said, therefore, there's really no reason not to have them all now. The Champion Edition does add enough value, at least in most people's minds. We don't care so much about costumes generally, but it might be useful later. The person you're most likely to see actually do this is Just Fine, because she is an absolute costume fiend. Overall, it looks to me as if Santir's plans work out mostly. As usual, the idea here is not necessarily to win outright, especially in a match you've never practiced, but to see if your ideas of how to force your opponent's behavior to change actually have that effect. And based on what he and I have discussed, although it wasn't much, there's definitely some of that going on here. The first order strategy for Gil basically does fall apart given his main game plan. Explaining it in full is difficult. That is fine. You know what? I'll take it. For those of you who can no longer see, Akuma's win quote to Gil is, "I am the only path."
Round one.
I guess?
Fight.
Sure. We see the clear use of the Demon Flip to give Gil that sort of problem that he and Yumian both have, where they can anti-air well, but don't deal so well with characters who change their air arcs. It's the same thing we discussed last week with how Nikali benefits against Gil. You basically have to change your jump arc with Nikali at least some of the time. And Akuma benefits a lot from being able to do this with Demon Flip. Enough to make Gil have to be on edge and think about it. The main issue being that committing to the Demon Flip means that while you do get the opponent to fade backwards slowly, you will eventually lose out at some point. Therefore, you have to very carefully aim to get as much benefit from the push as you can, because honestly, Gil just has to mostly be calm about it. It is, however, a really good use for Akuma's meter, specifically Demon Flipping into the EX Air Fireball. Maintains space really well. This therefore opens up Akuma's ability to just jump, which is actually really important in this matchup. And Air Tatsu, while it normally does not get a lot of use in Akuma's play, works against Gil decently well. So, we expect to see a lot of change in this once Gilbot is available to Suntier. But this main strategy seems to be working out so far.
Round one. Fight.
The key is probably eventually going to be figuring out what to do in the space where the enemy actually retreats and gives all that space. It was at least a partially undeveloped idea, because there had never been a test fully of what a Gil does in that scenario. But Akuma's ability to bypass neutral is meaningful enough that this can be a full strategy, at least for now. Gil does have options here though, and strong ones. He simply has to respond to Demon Flip with his moonsault. The reason this doesn't help him in the long term is that Akuma can continue to use the EX Fireball even in response to that.
It is time to proceed with the plan. Round two. Fight.
Gil has basically no other downside to responding with moonsault. He can also use his standard kick in certain places, but it's easier to just moonsault because Akuma's animations for Demon Flip mean that he mostly just gets over everything Akuma wants to do when he uses it. The difficulty here being that you're basically treating moonsault as a very complex anti-air, and if you're not used to the idea, you might be too slow. And if you're too slow, that really actually will open up the opportunity for Akuma to do something, which is kind of a big deal. in general, Moonsault can be used as Gil's version of Demon Flip. I am going around this particular part of neutral. But he can only use it defensively because he doesn't have enough changes. He only has changes in terms of how far he can go rather than really how long he spends in the move.
Let's do this. Harmony. Round one. Fight!
We expect this to be a lot harder for her, for the same basic reason it was last time. It can be difficult for Kansuki Dynasty to play a very specific type of footsies, and Gil is frustrating enough in the very precise aspects of how he does it, plus his stand medium kick is only stand medium punch is only -2, that it all becomes very difficult for a player whose thought process revolves around making the opponent hit buttons, but without having the skill set required to actually make them hit the buttons. The only thing you can really do in this matchup for Kareem is with punish your opponent and block a lot of fireballs. Which means you have to spend your entire time not only walking to very precise spaces, but being incredibly calm once in those places, and expecting your opponent to do certain things. If you are at the point where you are twitching because you are trying to catch them because you're not fast enough, all that will happen is that Gil players at a certain level will punish you. So this is going to be a long period of practice. Basically, you can see it here. There are definitely Gil buttons that enter her space by necessity, but don't get whiff punished because she's just not used enough to whiff punishing this type of character. Karina's character is strong enough that this works out regardless. But you really have to be focused on it in order to make this work.
You lose.
And in order to whiff punish at the level required, you have to be extremely calm. For characters like Karine, who basically must do it with technically slower buttons, Karine's buttons are not actually that fast for the purpose. She mostly depends on her stand medium punch, same as she does in the Abigail matchup. But hitting it too early doesn't solve anything. There you go. But as you can see, the main thing you have to do is rely on the range of the move. The opponent must stop Karine from walking close enough to hit with crouch medium kick, but that also means that you can learn the timings at which they have to hit buttons. Being primed to hit her stand medium punch in that case is often helpful. But you still have to be extremely relaxed to actually do it. Otherwise that will happen. For the most part, you can see exactly this matchup. Unlike a lot of other things where you don't really have the capacity to say this is exactly what's happening, you can watch this match and say this is exactly what's happening. You can see every point where Gil sticks out a button that Kareem could hit. You You can see when Karine takes too many steps forward without getting the crouch medium kick in. And you can see when she hits the wrong button as the whiff punish because she's primed. This is actually, again, relatively difficult to just do, okay, I have these two buttons, and I'm going to naturally relax into hitting this one at this time, and this other one at this other time. Gil's moonsault is controllable in the air. As answered to Omnirabbit's question. This is not necessarily a character where Omnirabbit needs to spend a lot of time doing the same sort of thing. Not a dash blocking as much anyway. But the actual whiff punishing is a fairly important thing for this matchup. One of Lara's main difficulties is that she must confirm into a very specific thing in order to get the effect, if she does succeed at the whiff punish. Lara's good whiff punishes on this character are, of course, the Illuminati button, which for some reason beats all Illuminati characters, crouch heavy punch,
Round 1.
and her stand medium kick. Her stand medium kick must almost always be confirmed into her V skill forward. Gil's goal in this matchup should therefore be to simply not play footsies with Lara. All he will end up doing is sticking buttons into her space unnecessarily. Honestly, you should just play extremely lame against Lara, in general as Gil. Main reason? Because Lara players eventually get bored. And Gil is much stronger against a bored Lara than he is against the Lara he's trying to do footsies with. She's just too good at punishing things in general. She's too good at claiming space and getting through it. She's too good at the specific type of whiff punish into close position that is needed. Even our crouch medium kick does the job very well, and Omnirabbit's feature, the two-part, means that this is not really good in terms of projectile games either. She just counters the character's actions too much. Gil benefits the most therefore from taking very few actions. His crouch medium kick and stand medium punch become his better options. Stand light kick also helps. And in fact, that's part of the reason why Gilbot is built like that. Crouch medium kick is so much better as an option in most matchups that it's just the thing we decided to make sure everyone knew how to whiff punish. The button is long, it's also slow, but at least when you do get it, there's a lot of benefit to it. And here we have that problem. Lara gets to lay this out really heavily, even more so than Sagat matches when she's like this. Because Sagat at least will be able to use Tiger Knee, which not only has multiple hits, but can use a different approach timing. Lariats don't really have a different approach timing. They're either going to reach Lara or not, and they tend to do it within the same amount of time. If you learn to sway Lariats, you're just going to be able to sway Lariats. There's nothing difficult about it, other than the training of it. Meaning that Lara can sit on a life lead in this matchup for a really, really long time. Because she can also walk the opponent back to the wall, the situation gets worse for Gil, even if she activates like mid-match here. she doesn't need to not activate it because she doesn't need the V reversal for much. This isn't the character that's going to spend a lot of time doing things that mess you up. Even here, technically, by most standards, Laura has won the match. Now, in this case, she doesn't necessarily, but there's a crouch medium kick coming in. One of the main things you have to understand about Gil's projectiles, in order to play this sort of game against him, is that cryokinesis and pyrokinesis are different speeds. While Gil does have the ability to do different heights of the projectile, like, unlike Urian, he doesn't really have the 2 down and 1 up to use the varied speed, so the varied speed is given to him by which move he does. Pyrokinesis attacks are always fast, cryokinesis are always slow. This is somewhat modifiable by the ES versions, but overall, in standard play, you can tell the projectile's speed and its effectiveness in that space entirely by which element it is. This, for example, therefore is an incredibly heavy uphill struggle. Omnirabbit has a huge life lead, has the ability to build up more V-meter by just blocking more stuff, and will eventually therefore be able to sway through something and finish the match regardless of anything else. The choice to use the meter there was actually therefore fairly interesting, but you do get to see how this works out, and he is probably practicing hitting the max range EX bolt through Gil stuff, because while sway is helpful, sway does not solve the max range problem. Therefore, sway is stronger once you have gotten closer to the edge of the screen, and Gil is not really good at jumping out of Laura's corner guard. Unlike Urian, who can specifically do crazy things until it works, Gil doesn't have enough crazy things to get him out.
Let's do this.
That's how you start the fight and finish it quickly.
Round 1.
Now we're on to the main event.
Fight.
Bathhouse and all. This is somewhat Omnirabbit sandbagging, but not in the way you'd expect necessarily. This is about figuring out the optimal range to dash at different characters from, and recognizing mid-dash what the opponent did to let go of your own focus in the middle of the dash and recognize either, okay, I can block this, my opponent should have a response, my opponent wasn't twitchy enough and therefore I'm about to get hit and should just hold that, and my opponent is stressed to the point where they're going to be slow and I should get the button for free. This level of skill for dashing is something that characters who need to get in, players of those characters spend a massive amount of time learning this. The better they get at it, the harder they are to beat. One thing that this really helps with Lara and characters like Chun-Li and Karine is that they have other options for their advancing moves, meaning that the opponent can be beaten if they can trick into hitting buttons to check the dash, which are then vulnerable to other moves. And in the end, we want to be closer. That's the intention.
Lara wins.
Jumping is not usually a great idea in most games, in most matchups. There are definitely matchups where Lara wants to jump. She drives Juri crazy with it. But this is, for example, is not one of them. Necalli generally deals with Lara's jumps very well. What he does not do that well is deal with Lara's perfectly spaced dashes. Fortunately for Necalli, Stomp is safe enough that if he's willing to do it, and can be so quick as to do it on reaction, he'll be fine. The main problem with doing it on reaction is that, again, it opens him up to a bunch of other Lara things. Most importantly, if you actually do this, you now must face Lara's new buff, her new light kick sunset wheel. Light kick sunset wheel is now a whiff punish. It is functionally, I am dashing into the grab. Effectively, before, Lara needed meter to do this. Now, she doesn't. She basically has a non-EX version of what used to be EX Sunset. And that was why this became so important. Because at 18 frames, this may not feel like a whiff punish, but I promise you there's a whiff punish levels hit involved here. This also helps you learn to read the emotions of a match. If you keep on getting checked in your dashes, especially with something as relatively innocuous as Stomp, it implies that your opponent is in a mental state where dashing up and hitting the button could work. You just have to put enough stress on them that they won't manage to hit the button before you get there. And sometimes you can just hate the hit from when they do. This is particularly important for Lara because it makes opponents want to stand at that range where she gets to do the overhead, and certain footsie characters don't benefit as much. Specifically, this is a good anti-birdie tactic. It's decent against Sagat.
Lara wins.
And it works wonders against most Chun and Falk. In fact, you can train it on Falk bot pretty well. Alice is another character where dashing in is helpful. But it looks like we're not seeing Alice today, so onward. Maybe to Sakura. Sakura's better at dealing with this than most characters. Mainly because her stand medium kick stops a lot of things that Lara wants to do, and her crouch medium kick has just enough range to make Lara's life annoying. However, Lara does have a couple of options, just not the greatest ones. Expecting therefore this to be more annoying. Most characters, stand medium kick is not a safe button. Not safe enough that you would use it in neutral to check things. Certainly not things that happen because the opponent is specifically further away. Sakura is probably the only character who gets to do this entirely with full advantage. She has no reason to just not keep on hitting stand medium kick in this matchup, purely to stop Lara from approaching. Making this another matchup where Lara basically can't jump, and she loses a lot of her "I'm hitting this button now" reactions. The key to this, therefore, is move a little closer. Unlike most characters, where Lara actually wants to dash from further out in order to prevent the problem, in Sakura's case, she actually wants to get a little closer before she dashes. This usually stops her from being able to use the overhead, but overhead wasn't a strong part of this matchup anyway. Sakura must remain strongly defensive for enough of this matchup that Lara gets to throw claps. And she gets to stand at a range where throwing the clap, particularly the medium clap, similar to how you face Minot, allows her to still do anti-airs if necessary.
Round 2. Fight.
The layers stack on once they both have their triggers available. But a lot of this is about recognizing the timing to throw the clap, do the light bolt, and finally dash. Because you're more so looking to make Sakura make a mistake based on the number of things she has to look out for. If you can get your timing for clap synchronized with Sakura's back dashes, you're basically set. Sakura must backdash because of the rest of the flow of the match. Meaning that while the dash practice is going to be important, there's another component required here to make it actually work. It doesn't necessarily have to be a backdash either. Sakura is not a character that has a way to really deal with claps. Not at the right range anyway. And honestly, Lara doesn't really want to be that close to this character unless she is already on offense. The final part is that the clap moves Lara forward just enough that, in most cases, the second projectile Sakura wants to throw is easily caught by EX Sunset. Sakura's goal, therefore, should be to mix up the idea of whether or not she wants to throw the projectile after being placed in that situation, or neutral jump. The neutral jump being the main counter to anything else Lara wants to do. Once she is cornered, the rest is a matter of physical reactions. As Sakura is one of the Shotos that doesn't really have a way out of Lara's corner guard either. She has very little bypass neutral options, even with her newbie skill, as just demonstrated. And trying to play neutral with Lara when she has nowhere to back off to is much more difficult. However, just like Kage, actually advancing on Sakura forces Omnirabbit to deal with her tick throw or her throw setups. It'll probably just loop forever that way. The clap must be thrown, in short.
Nice try. You almost did it.
Fortunately for Lara, other people's life leads aren't real. Ever.
That was so close.
Round 2. Fight.
The other reason is because Sakura players often like to dash forward and backward. But everything about Sakura's rhythm, especially because her projectile takes longer to come out, is countered by needing to counter clap. So So much like Boxer, this is another matchup where throwing clap out is a huge deal for Lara. And mechanically, Sakura just doesn't actually have responses. Or at least none that Lara fears enough to care. She would eventually get cornered, and this will happen. Oh, she didn't die. I would actually call this a 6-4 matchup, if not for the fact that Sakura players are so good at timing a specific thing. We've actually been through this before. Most Sakura players will play V-Trigger too, and if you ever remember from a very long time ago, against Lara you want VT1. VT1 makes Lara unable to do anything because it gives Sakura a new button in neutral that basically Lara doesn't have a counter for and can pulse through and somewhat negate clap without leaving Sakura spending too much time inching backward.
Let's do this.
This training is not as meaningful for a Sun tier. Akuma doesn't generally check dashes in the same way as most other characters, and he doesn't generally benefit too much from doing it.
That's how you start the fight and finish
It's
it
similar to
quickly.
Ken. But there is still something to be said for it in the sense that that Omnirabbit can use the same effective strategy as against Sakura, but with a different goal. And this is very important to do in your life, in fighting games. Understanding when you do the exact same thing, but the purpose is entirely different. Lara throws clap in this matchup, primarily to make Akuma do something, because then she can play footsies. If Akuma refuses to do anything, eventually he just gets anti-aired. Or spends the entire round doing literally nothing, which is, depending on your perspective of the game, good. Akuma has very real and very specific counters to Lara clap, but most players will not use them, will not, because they are among the riskiest things Akuma can do. And that's generally not a fun way to spend your time. On a low health character, specifically taking heavy risks, because your opponent is doing a single move that they can easily do. But we've discussed this before. The general way that Akuma deals with Lara throwing out claps is instant air fireball. It's risky because if Lara doesn't throw the clap or you're too slow, you just get picked up anyway. It's hard to execute, and if you mess up the execution, then Lara wins anyway. And if Lara happens to have done basically anything other than clap, you just get hit.
Lara wins.
In fact, it is for precisely this reason that Lara wants to do this, because she doesn't generally take too much damage if she's spaced correctly when she claps. If Akuma does it right, all it does is counter the move and make her have to deal with, did Akuma jump with the fireball or without it?
Fight.
So she just more or less throws this out ridiculously often, and Akuma has to deal with some things. Therefore, it's better for her to play this game from range. He doesn't really need to fight her from close up anyway, except for the fact that he'll eventually be cornered. But while Lara is a good character at catching Akuma's teleports, that's only true once she's actually gotten him all the way to the corner. Akuma can teleport out, both before that and as soon as Lara commits to something. And because Lara's moves are so committed in terms of when she has to move forward, Akuma has a lot of time to get that teleport off. Therefore, you can start preparing for the teleport at timings even like this one. At some point, Lara must come forward, or she can actually trap her way entirely in, but even this has some downsides because then at least sweep starts to work. But this moment is often a teleport moment one way or the other. So you choose to go back in this case, but it's not really specifically worse to do so or not. Understanding when you should push to the other side of Lara because you expect the character to advance is a skill Akuma and Ibuki players often use.
Here we go.
Omnirabbit does have the tech though. That move does have a specific timing at which, if you do it in response to Red Fireball, you go grab Akuma just at the point where he sticks out his hurt box enough to be grabbed. That isn't really something you need to train against Akuma so much. A lot of characters do this on their Fireball supers, and they all have about the same, on their Fireball moves, sorry. And they all have around the same startup on the really powerful ones. So, slower Fireballs can almost always be reacted to that way, and almost all in about the same timing. This match, however, is 100% the thing we were discussing, and they've practiced this before.
Finish it quickly.
Round one. Fight.
It's particularly useful because Karin is so much better at being frustrating and converting into bigger damage. In short, whenever Omnirabbit messes up the spacing or timing, there's a lot more damage that gets taken. Since Lara also basically doesn't beat Karin in footsies, it becomes much more straining and therefore more important. So it's a good mental test for Omnirabbit to have to deal with it. One thing it does manage, however,
Round two.
is that it denies Karin a lot of options when it comes to meter. She eventually builds it up, but she doesn't get to play the match in a way where she can easily abuse it. Now we can definitely see there are definitely some spaces where Kazuki could check the dash, and I'm fairly sure that Omnirabbit is aware of when he has made the mistake and should have been checked. But that's team practice for you. Eventually she will start to check them. But the important thing from his side is to recognize that it can happen. You can still absolutely train this sort of thing at a level required, even against opponents who don't actually do the response. Simply because you can keep track of the fact that you should have done better there and did not.
I'll admit that you have some skill.
Final round. Fight.
It's also a good way to train at a specific level against certain types of characters without necessarily all of the layers of stress involved that would prevent you from actually learning the thing you're trying to work on. Understanding how to optimize your training against your less experienced team members is really important. For example, Omnirabbit can spend more time in this tracking whether or not he's dropping the actual dashing part because of other aspects of the match.
Round one. Fight!
Therefore, high focus players who have been playing the game a while and have learned to consider specific methods of training can do so against players who have less focus in the matter. You can see here Laura's strength in this regard. She can dash up to a space where the opponent worries at least a little bit. At least some opponents worry anyway. But she's not in any danger if they don't react, and she can whiff punish if they do. It's also a good way to test exactly how much any given thing you need to do in a match takes up your focus, without necessarily wondering about whether or not your actual teammate is not ranked. It's not a big deal. You can definitely relax and think, okay, I can do this or not do this, but then spend your time recognizing, oh, this is actually not working. This is hard enough that I lose my focus on it. And that gives you a good measure by which to decide whether or not you want to try it in matches that matter to you just yet. It is mostly by the same principle that you can use bots.
Final round.
You can, at any time when fighting a bot, decide which exactly of the things you want to do you want to focus on. Do you want to learn to do all of the things against the bot? Do you want to perfect your meter watching? Do you want to make sure that you have everything in place? And you can use it to measure exactly what happens to you and to your focus while doing it. How often do you get hit? How often do you drop the thing you're doing, etc. One of the important things about this is the fact that once you learn to see holes in your gameplay, you start to understand why it is possible for higher level players to defeat you so consistently. Consistency in winning these out is almost always about whether or not you can take advantage of smaller holes than most people. Understanding that something is a hole a moment where your opponent is unguarded either psychologically or because of game mechanics, is something you have to train. And this is why sometimes fighting high-level players, if you are at least conscious of what's happening in the matches, is helpful, because they can exploit the holes that you sort of knew were there but didn't know how big a deal they were, didn't know how often they came up while you were stressed, etc. You don't necessarily have to think of it as, this game is broken, or I'm terrible. You're bad in the sense that there are holes in your flow, but those holes only matter if you can't A, distract your opponent to the point where they don't have the focus to take advantage of them,
Harmony.
or
That is round one.
if you can't stop yourself from having them when your health is too low to afford it.
Pyrokinesis.
The dash up strategy doesn't work against Gil as well. Again, because Gil has buttons that take up a lot of space that benefit a lot from it. You just don't always win out using this tactic against him. Lara does still have to basically play the whiff punish game, in other words. She can also, though, however, just dash from really far. And basically take advantage of the fact that, once again, against Lara, life leads aren't real. Only stress is real. Either the Lara player is stressed, or they're not stressed. And if they're not stressed, then your life lead does not matter. She's also, for example, one of the hardest characters to get that little last poke on, because she doesn't trade much in terms of what her attacks do. When she does, it's because you should have hit her anyway, but you were slightly too slow. So therefore, should the player stop trying? Usually not. The Lara player should almost always keep trying. The main difficulty from Lara's side, therefore, is that of her 3 required whiff punishes, they're very, very different from each other. Because you can spend a lot of time, for example in Gil space, taking out the hole that is whiff punished by her punch heavy ability. That's what we're seeing in this matchup, in fact. By refusing to use most of Gil's crouching moves, the President is able to avoid having to deal with Lara's crouching moves. But this leaves him vulnerable to her forward heavy punch and her stand medium kick, although that one is much harder. Double back. Other thing that this does, though, is that it lets Lara dash from closer again. And the only way to stop her from doing that is to throw fireballs. That will let her jump, and so the cycle goes on around.
Let's see what you got. Here I
It is this depth that most of us are aiming for when we play these games, specifically Street Fighter and DOA style games. And is also one of the parts of the games that Omnirabbit enjoys the most. Meaning that practicing it for a couple hours against us is really not that big a deal. You can see right there, similar to a particular Bison spacing that he faced at East Coast Throwdown, there is a spacing where Lara can stand, where Gil has to worry about her jumping. because while he can definitely throw out a projectile that matters, again, you don't really want to be giving Laura even the slightest option to jump.
Let's see what you've got.
Can you endure the pain? Can you endure the pain? Pyrokinesis. These dogs will.
And that super does not do a lot of chip, so I guess that's not going to be an easy way out of that situation.
Round 2. Fight. Pyrokinesis.
Gil's stronger button in this matchup, therefore, is in fact his stand medium kick, but this one also easily has relatively large flaws, because it becomes like a Bison matchup again. There is a specific type of Bison against whom Lara just throws light clap repeatedly, because it forcing him to stick his foot into the button. This is a lot of layers, and Gil as a character generally will cause that in other players. He's probably going to be one of the characters that has the most matchup understanding, the number of things you have to keep in mind against him. Understanding what type of Gil you're fighting, therefore, is going to be a big deal. But this walk down is still going to continue to be as real as ever.
It is time to pursue. Final round. Fight.
So while it is a strong button in the matchup, we wouldn't necessarily suggest for Guild players to go, oh, keep Lara out with your stand medium kick, because most Laras know how to deal with this from the perspective of throwing the clap at the right timing and balancing speed. You could probably do it in the middle of the match, especially if you've got the life lead, because it takes so long for Guild to be beaten up by this, and then you just get the trigger, which is really good. But overall, it depends on one, which B trigger you chose, and two, the Lara player's intent. Because if Lara is only throwing clap because she doesn't want you to kick her, you're not necessarily going to come out on top here. If she specifically is trying to get in and that's the thing on her mind, sure, it will work, because you will get to do things like that. But if she just throws clap because she doesn't want to get kicked and expects you to do something anyway, it's not going to work out as well. Again, life leads aren't real.
Lara wins. Let's do this.
Well, ominously, the Kali theme has started to play at this moment. This is also part of why there are certain matchups where neutral jumping against Lara is so beneficial. When she is far out, if your character doesn't have a good, long
Boom! That's how you start the
neutral
fight
jump
and
heavy
finish
kick,
it quickly.
you may be in some trouble. But those with it, especially those where she also needs to dash from closer, that becomes a good counterpoint in the matchup. Nikali is almost at the edge of this. He's a character where she doesn't really need to dash from closer. And his neutral jump heavy kick isn't necessarily the greatest button. But there's just enough flow in the matchup that there are going to be times where she does want to do that and doesn't want to give Nikali time to reposition himself forward. Recognizing this means that he can often get the neutral jump. Her dash is just slow enough that it works out for him, at least some of the time. Generally, thinking that he's also a character who wants to down back at least some of the time can subconsciously bias Lara into doing overhead. And the neutral jump heavy kick is a decent answer to the overhead. Plus, the more you jump against Lara in this matchup, the more likely she is to start ignoring the jumps as a whole, giving Nikali the opportunity to make use of his actual ability to leap. Both of them. Looks like he chose V-trigger 2 though, so no jump today. At least no leap up that time. Now we get to the point of when you have overwhelmed your opponent with your ability to dash at them, and they start to back off a whole lot, what then? It can be hard, but usually what you can do is just get them to the corner. Because then, you can ignore all of that. The rest of that match, the whole I need to dash because reasons, that's not there anymore. You can entirely ignore it. In short, you dash like this to get the opponent to the corner where your character has a big enough advantage that you no longer care about the dashing. Go ham, as they say. It's part of the build. It's there for a reason. Your opponent's job should be to keep themselves from getting cornered, which means they have to get better at stopping the dashes so that they don't. But there are definitely parts of your game that you can get to drop once the scenario has changed enough to drop them. And that's one of those things. Lara doesn't necessarily care about perfectly spacing her dashes anymore when she's cornered you, because her corner guard as a character is so genuinely good that it doesn't matter. It's hard to get past her even if you manage to land a hit, because most of the hits you land are not going to be particularly overwhelming, given her defensive stances, and it's just a matter of, can you get her to anti-air you wrong? Nikali is, however, a character who gets Lara to anti-air him wrong fairly easily. If he can spare the health, this is a real option. This is probably what got her the reputation as the robbery character back then, because it's by design necessary for her to have that whole like that's not a real thing in order to function.
Lara wins.
Other players got used to the idea that, oh, I've gotten Lara all the way down here, therefore I should be winning. No, the question is more so, did you manage to stress out the Lara player? Because if you didn't, then your health doesn't matter.
Fight.
If you did stress her out, then sure, you should be considering that you won, and then maybe you dropped a combo and then she squished you with all of her moves and it was terrible. But that happens to anyone that drops combos against nearly every character in the game, assuming enough resources. Lara just needs less resources to do it. reasonable given that it's almost impossible for her to build them up if you're playing particularly well. She has very few moves she can actually whiff in neutral to build up meter. And her pressure strings, while good, don't necessarily do too much. As in, almost everything she does is actually checkable with no practice.
Round 2. Fight!
There you see part of the reason why. Necalli's neutral jumping heavy kick has a really weird hurt box, which allows him to evade a lot of Laura normals, as well as her overhead. This is true for a lot of characters, but other people, at least, you know, if you mistime it, your trade or something. Necalli, not so much. This is one of the characters where Laura has to spend the most time focusing on what happens in scrambles, which is fine because there's not really a whole lot of other complexity to matchup, thankfully. But scrambles are super important here because if you drop your focus in the scramble situation, Necalli also gets big explosive punishes.
Laura wins. Let's do this.
Also, please forgive any general coughing or terrible pronunciation because I'm actually sick. End of year flu is a serious thing. Now here we go into one of the matches where this is hardest on Laura as a whole because once again she has to change her focus.
That's how you start the fight and finish
When
it
Laura
quickly.
dashes against Alex,
Round 1. Fight!
what she does at the end of the dash is entirely different than against every other character. He has so many ways to check her long before just to stick out buttons into it. She can't do it from too far away or she gets no advantage. And depending on what he was doing, then he gets to respond with aerial style moves that would avoid any throws or even lows that she did. So, what now? Interestingly, therefore, Laura wants to do two things once she dashes at Alex. One is to look for a moment to neutral jump kick herself. Which is hard enough to get used to in the first place. And the second is to hit crouch, heavy punch, or stand light punch. The crouch heavy punch doesn't necessarily help too much, but it can cause Alex players to miss their various moves.
Round 2.
The stand light punch is not the best option button in most situations, but against Alex it's really good. thing about this, the really good thing about this, is that this is at least partially combinable. You can absolutely dash up, jab, and still neutral jump. Alex players have to be really on point for this to not work. Even better is that dash up jab in neutral against Alex just helps. As a whole, it's just a useful move. Lara's jab is just oddly spaced in terms of hurt and hitbox enough that it's one of her better buttons against characters like Alex and Zeku, whose main goal is to also move. Zeku is not normally that type of character, but technically it's that different forms of Zeku you hit different buttons to check them in neutral. Stand Light Kick is used for reach to poke Zeku out of things when he wants to do them, and Stand Light Punch is used to stop his movement. Alex is also that character. You can see actually there that this move, if you think about it, is in a way a whiff punish. Lara can absolutely dash up jab Alex as they punish certain of his buttons because they take so long. What she gets out of this? Nearly nothing. But she is plus. And being plus against Alex is one of the most important things ever for this character. Because Alex is so good at preventing her from being plus. Therefore preventing her from getting any command grabs, or normal grabs, or certain mix-ups entirely. Meaning that you can disable Alex's ability to keep Lara out by doing this. And since he has so few moves that really frustrate or bother her, she generally doesn't need to block as much. This is where the whiff punish part comes in. It is not often that characters have moves that are slow enough where the dash is itself a functional whiff punish. But grapplers often have flows that are at least somewhat similar to this. One difficulty here will of course be making sure that you actually commit to it enough to do the standing light punch. The difference is minuscule, but minuscule is a big deal in this game.
Final round. Fight.
Once Lara has basically shut down Alex's tendency to hit moves in neutral through using this method, she gets a lot more freedom in terms of actually approaching his legs. And that's one of the biggest things it offers. It isn't part of the dash process. In fact, generally if she wants to hit with the crouch medium kick, she walks. But she can definitely do some things. And once again, you can rely entirely on the fact that once life leads aren't real. Alex in turn should generally do that. That's one of his main counters to these things. Especially when cornered. Lara doesn't have good corner guard against Alex. We've specifically discussed the strength of her corner guard against other characters, but her corner guard against Alex is nearly non-existent. Alex just does whatever he wants and gets out almost 100% of the time.
Fight.
If he has meter, now with the fact that air knee smash hits like that, he'll just free. He's just out almost all the time he gets out. Her counters to this are nearly nothing, and if he defends long enough, that will happen. there isn't really a good answer to this. You don't see the Lara versus Alex matchup quite often enough for this to come up as a serious thing. But it's definitely something to bear in mind when playing it, because as we've studied corner guard extensively across characters, this was the one that really made us go, this is when you have zero corner guard. This is when you cannot keep your opponent in the corner. As soon as Alex got the ability to do that, that was instantly deactivating all options Lara had in the matter. You cannot hold a Alex with meter on this character. Either meter. If he has either B trigger, any B CA gauge at all, she just can't do it. Fortunately, she also beats him in neutral, especially with this aspect of it. With the crouch one, there's a chance that Alex will get out if he jumps correctly or something, or does specific moves. But stand jab just works really often.
Lara wins.
So that's been about a 90-minute session for our Lara. You normally can keep going longer, but generally training this specific sort of thing, one doesn't generally. So this is probably Omnirabbit's last match of the night. Training against Rune Siren, assuming he wins.
Let's do this.
It's something that's happened already. And facing Gil isn't really the same thing. The Gil play he's going to have to deal with involves at least some look at Gilbot, some play against relatively higher level Gil who are more easily going to take advantage of specific holes in practice, and he can practice against them. And I doubt the President is getting a lot out of it either because of the way that Lara plays. This is a lot more about, is Lara's defense or is Lara's execution good enough to stop Gil from doing stuff, to take advantage of the holes in Gil play. So you don't really learn it until Lara has reached the level of doing so.
Round one.
Therefore,
Fight.
let's count this as Rabbit's last match of the night. That is one of the most important aspects of this game for Akuma. Understanding how and when to uppercut Lara. Sweep also helps a lot. Sweep, however, of course, leaves them really vulnerable to things. But it's still important to think about. Fortunately, like nearly every character in this game, Akuma can cancel sweep with the trigger. Meaning that setting up for V-Trigger in this matchup can be really helpful. Basically recognizing, oh, I'm eventually going to mess up a sweep, so let's make sure that I have this ready for that. The problem being that it's kind of hard to build up the meter required, but she's not the most parryable character. This match, therefore, is a lot of layers, and honestly, can be played the opposite way. Akuma can play this match somewhat running away with a lot of patience, understanding perfect times for teleportation. Fortunately for Akuma,
Round one. Fight.
executed forward teleports don't generally hurt his game plan against Lara. Most likely, the thing that's going to happen is one of the other things he wanted anyway. So his goal is mostly to guard his space and figure out how to teleport out if he somehow ends up getting closer to the corner than he wants to. This works out well because Lara actually has very few options to getting to him. When he's really in the zone and doing just enough things, it doesn't really work. She can't get to him. She's just waiting for him to mess up. Or for him to get hurt. This therefore makes for a very, very high tension match and is useful for training your stamina in that sort of thing.
Round two. Fight.
Once again with a good uppercut. But without the crash counter, that one is not going to confirm.
Lara wins.
So, thank you Omnirabbit for joining us for your training, and we'll probably continue the lounge overall. And the stream probably gets another half hour. There's no specific reason we're likely to stop it.
It's go time.
You can of course feel free to join us. Present may not have been expecting a turn, but either way, this time we let it drop on his side if necessary, and go to the other side of this.
Let's do this.
Chasing down Nikali. This is difficult for Kansuki Dynasty because she doesn't block standing that much. However, you can use a specific mental spacing trick that comes from DOA to remind yourself to do it. If your entire point with your dash was to put yourself at a space where your opponent doesn't have any good lows, then you can dash up. Again, letting go of your mental intent in the moment of the dash.
Fight.
And watching your opponent to decide whether or not you should block high or low. It helps if you don't default to the high block, because the high block causes you to back off from the opponent. But depending on what you wanted to do, this is perfectly fine as well. If you just wanted to advance into space that your opponent was giving up, then good. In short, this is a tactical question. For her, this is about using the dashes not necessarily to get in on Nikali, but to get Nikali to the point where Karine gets the corner guard. Karine's corner guard against Nikali is fairly good, actually. Specifically because almost all of her moves that do this cover so much space, and she can jump into things really early. specifically Nikali's main ways of getting out of those situations. Get beaten easily by her air target combo. Similarly, Cosmic Wolf has a good reason to keep doing the overhead, but not as a generality. This is more so a I am training with my partner who I know has problems blocking this move. This sort of thing is difficult to do properly in team training, especially for a person like Cosmic Wolf who genuinely has problems getting himself to not do things that don't have a negative feedback. Specifically, overall, if he doesn't get punished for something, he's not going to stop doing it. Meaning that it's possible to build up bad habits against players who have a weakness to a particular thing. Which is also why you often don't see his training. He's often required to train against players who will absolutely destroy any habit that isn't actually meaningful, because otherwise he will never stop doing it. And Nikali is absolutely a character who takes a lot of risks for big rewards, or uses conditioning on the opponent to get big advantages.
You win.
But that doesn't mean this is useless. In a large enough lounge where two players are not just consistently playing each other, the frustrations that go with this
Round one.
get spread out over time. And you get to face people who do make the punish often enough to remind you, oh right, yeah, I shouldn't necessarily do this. Cosmic Wolf does have a good lead on other people's timing for doing certain attacks though, meaning that even though technically the corner guard is good, his general ability to, let's say, sense that it's time to jump out because the opponent is going to try to launch an attack helps a lot here. Forcing Kansuki Dynasty to vary her timing
Round two.
and her mental state once corner guard has started. Something she also needs practice with. Because as you can see, that's actually really easy to do. But if you're trying to hit Nikali, it doesn't work that well. Similarly, you can't just never hit Nikali because then you haven't achieved anything by cornering it. Learning to make your own timings a little bit off in situations like this is important. Even if you continue to have a strong game plan and are not a particularly random person, the main thing to do is not let yourself be too autopilot-y on your corner guard. Interestingly, this is also why our corner guard bot, the one you use to train it, is also the autopilot bot. If you feel the need to train your corner guard in this game, you do it against Nashbot. so you don't even have to learn a different bot to do it with. That, however, counts as one of our, hey, if you keep doing this, I'm going to hit you. So eventually he may get trained out of that particular thing, because it's not really going to be any better if it was an uppercut.
It's go time. Let's do this.
I'll show you the divide in our class.
So here we go. We're back to a familiar match, but with a little bit of information on the board. You see, Kareen also benefits heavily from the whole dash up and hit a light versus Alex thing. In other words, she can absolutely treat a dash as a whiff punish against this character. It helps that her stand light kick is like +3. In her case, it's a little bit harder because he can jump out of the spacing where the hurt box gets out of the way of the stand light kick. But Kareen's dash is also faster than Laura's, so overall, it still works out well. What she does not have is the strongly beneficial I can hit you now easily because you have stuck out buttons to try to stop me button. Her stand heavy kick works, but it's not as payoff and is kind of iffy. One good option though is her light. Mujin and Light Rosanna, they both basically take up the same space in the matchup. Depending on how far away she is and what button she thinks these Alex players will hit.
Final round. Fight.
Alex also doesn't benefit at all from attempting to use his elbow against Kareen. The move is still only -2, but Kareen can just hit the crouch medium punch and then drop her stand. While the move is absolutely not punishable, Alex has little or nothing he can do if she just hits that. It also is exactly the position where she can again just stand light kick and be extremely plus. The move does not have that much pushback, so he has to hit it at max range, but usually she's not going to let him. Her stand light kick is therefore so heavily a part of this matchup. It's amazing that Kazuki Dynasty managed to play it for this long without it. It punishes outright the slash elbow. It can poke him out of the head crush.
Round one.
It gains heavy advantage after like kick elbow. It sort of whiff punishes, not in a useful way, but it sort of whiff punishes his crouch medium kick. It's just all around incredibly good button for the match. But you have to be patient enough about it. And patience is not her strong suit at this point, so whether or not this move gets used is going to be a lot more about understanding Alex's state of mind. Fortunately, she plays against quite a few Alex players, meaning that she'll get the test in various situations.
Round two. Fight.
And there you see exactly why that happens, because in almost all the timings, Alex is going to get hit by this move just as he tries to react to Kareem's dash. This is a relatively easy way to dismantle the character as a whole, actually, but he does have some good counters to it that are possible.
You win.
Specifically, Kareem's stand light kick, while it will counter hit a ton of things Alex wants to do, doesn't generally get her enough advantage that he can't backdash out afterwards. This has something to do with the way his backdash works and the range that she often dashes from.
Round one.
But in short, knowing that Kareem is not likely to go for the low on the dash up helps Alex out quite a bit. As you've just seen, he can back jump out of this. I actually don't think he can neutral jump out of it. I'm fairly sure he gets clipped a lot of the time when he neutral jumps, but something about his hurt box when jumping means that he gets out if he back jumps. This doesn't really help though, because back jumping is not something Alex wants to do in this matchup. His best option, therefore, is actually to resolve Kareem coming forward with his forward medium punch. Not because it's specifically easy, or even really deals with a lot of problems, but because of the timings required and the range on the move. Alex has one of the best longest range overheads in the game, and it's really not that downside for Alex to try to use it in most situations. It doesn't have a big payoff, and that's his main problem. But if you're good enough at charge timings, then using that move and then immediately charging something helps a lot.
You win.
In general, characters who can play footsies at that level but don't have specific types of moves will suffer against this type of thing. Of the characters in the game that can do it well and get big payoffs from doing it, there's only like 5 characters that can do it. Juri, Ibuki, Kareem, and Lara. I think Zaku can do it, but every time I've seen a Zaku try to do it, they run the risk of what happens during the counter hit, causing it to not work. And I'm still working out exactly why that is. But for you Zaku players, don't exactly rely on it, but you can give it a try. This also works for Bison, but Bison's dash is too long. So you're not really doing the same thing. It does work, but you're not really doing the same thing.
Round one. Fight!
This matchup is always relatively high octane. But as for what Suntier needs to make things easier on himself, it's mostly a fuzzy guard shimmy sort of thing. Akuma's main way of handling this matchup is to walk up to Kareen and then walk away very slightly. But the difficulty is timing the walk away such that he can then block the approach medium kick and not get caught. The easier way to handle this is, as soon as Kareen has low meter, do this a lot, because if you get clipped by the medium kick, it doesn't mean that much. Especially at the beginning of the round, where you aren't naturally in any bad position yet. You could at least get her focused on specific things without worrying too much. And you see there the benefits. Once you're in the corner, you spend the meter you built up doing this process. It's not the best way to play because it's a little predictable, but it's at least a good foundation. Because Akuma is not really Nakali level in terms of the difficulty of the corner guard that Kareen has, but it's definitely difficult. She wants to hit buttons in a way that lead to EX Demon Flip being strong. To the point where Akuma could often substitute it in entirely for EX Uppercut if the opponent did not advance right up to it. If the opponent did advance right up to him, he can sometimes still do it. And as you can see, it has a much less chance of being punished heavily for doing it. Kareen is also not a character that really hurts Akuma for doing the move. She can, but it's a lot of work. And it takes up enough meter for low enough damage that there's a benefit to him doing it.
You lose.
And there you get the am I getting the Demon Super or not shimmy. This is also a good reason why. If you get really high level at this game, you can shimmy into Demon Super in a way that Kareen just loses to automatically.
Round one. Fight!
And then the rest of the match is mostly fireballs. You see it, but played out quite well. Suntier immediately realized, okay, I'm no longer cornered, I don't need this meter right now. It's easy to use the EX Fireball and get some advantage.
Round two. Fight!
this is the hard part of the match. Karine absolutely has enough meter to win. She's a round up. There's no way to keep her out of this space. Only the EX wake up matters. And which EX wake up is chosen is something Karine will attempt to manipulate.
You win.
An overwhelming character is always going to put enough pressure on you that you don't know whether or not to use any specific wake-up.
Round one.
Fortunately, again, her corner guard is not necessarily strong enough that Kuma can't get out if he happens to block, and she happens to not take advantage of the block.
Round two.
Understanding the match from that level of decision making though does change it at least a bit.
You win.
That brings us to the end of our stream. Join us tomorrow for Tuesday Train, probably. And on Wednesday for more Disguidance with more bot checkup. Thursday will be Kame House, and Friday, hopefully, the final bot checkup. You can find all our bots at 2-mk.org. And all of our news about what we're streaming at 2_mk_FGC.
Let's do this.
The lounge will stay open for not really sure how much longer, but you can probably get a couple of matches in. As people do tend to leave, if you join now, you might get a couple. Sometimes it goes on quite long. But this match will not be on stream. We hope you're enjoying Champion Edition. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.